There is a version of this story that starts at the ending, but that version doesn't do justice to what it took to get there. So instead, it starts in a courthouse parking lot in Marietta, Georgia, on a Tuesday morning in March, where a woman named Renata Holloway sat in the driver's seat of a 2014 Honda Civic she'd bought with her own money, crying so hard she couldn't see the steering wheel. She wasn't crying because she lost. She was crying because the judge had just given Marcus Holloway, her ex-husband of 11 years, the man who had stolen $214, Zuzone from their joint accounts over 4 years and hidden it across 3 shell companies, the man who had told her she was too stupid to understand finances every time she asked a question. He had just given Marcus a handshake, a $6,000 fine, and a verbal warning, and Marcus had winked at her on the way out. That wink was the beginning of everything. Before we get into what happened next, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. And tell me, have you ever had to get even with someone? Because I genuinely want to know. Renata Elaine Holloway, née Okafor, was 41 years old when the parking lot happened. She had grown up in Columbus, Ohio, the daughter of a Baptist minister and a high school English teacher, and she had inherited her father's patience and her mother's precision. She had a degree in accounting from Ohio State, not a general business degree, not a communications degree, a full CPA track, which she had completed while working weekends at a grocery store chain to cover what her scholarship didn't. She was the kind of woman who color-coded her filing system, not because anyone told her to, but because disorder made her physically uncomfortable. She had met Marcus Holloway at a mutual friend's birthday party in Atlanta in 2009. He was charming in the specific way that some people are charming, effortlessly, almost reflexively. The way a salesman can't help pitching even on his day is off. He sold commercial real estate. He drove a leased BMW. He made her laugh on the first night and called her the next morning. She had never had a man call the morning after. She thought that meant something. They married in 2011 outside Decatur. 112 guests. Renata wore her mother's earrings. For the first 2 years it was fine, not extraordinary, but fine. Marcus worked long hours. Renata got a position as a financial analyst at a mid-sized logistics firm in Sandy Springs, a job she was very good at and quietly loved. They bought a house in a suburb outside Marietta, 4 bedrooms, a yard with a dogwood tree, a mortgage that required both their incomes to be manageable. In 2013, their daughter Imani was born. In 2014, their son Tobias. And somewhere between the birth of Tobias and the year 2016, the shape of the marriage changed in a way that Renata couldn't immediately name. Marcus had always had opinions, but they had been opinions mixed with deference. She was the accountant, after all, and he had respected that, at least nominally, in the early years. After 2016, the deference disappeared. What replaced it was something quieter and more insidious. He began managing the household accounts without telling her, not overtly seizing them, just slowly routing everything through accounts she didn't regularly monitor. He opened a joint checking account at a new bank, citing better rates, and began redirecting their direct deposits there. He told her the savings account had been moved to a higher yield account. He volunteered to handle the mortgage auto pay, the utility bills, the investment contributions, and when Renata asked questions, as she inevitably did, because she was an accountant who color-coded her filing system, Marcus would look at her with a particular expression: patient, indulgent. The expression a man uses when he is talking to someone he has already decided is beneath the conversation. Renata, he would say, I'm not going to explain escrow to you again, or you're an analyst, sweetheart, you do spreadsheets. This is actual finance, or most memorably, at a dinner party in 2018 in front of 6 other people, when she had asked him about a quarterly statement. My wife is an accountant who can't read her own bank statement. Isn't that the funniest thing you've ever heard? Everyone laughed. Renata excused herself to use the restroom and stood over the sink for 4 minutes, gripping the porcelain, looking at her own face. She told herself it wasn't what it looked like. She told herself he was stressed. She told herself that marriages had rough patches, and this was a rough patch, and she was strong enough to hold it together for Imani and Tobias, who were 5 and 4 years old, and who drew her pictures and brought her dandelions from the backyard and needed their parents to stay a family. So she held it together, and Marcus kept routing money. In 2019, Renata's firm underwent a merger, and she was placed on the integration audit team. 6 months of granular financial forensics, tracing asset movements across two merged companies, identifying discrepancies, documenting paper trails. It was the most technically demanding work she'd done in her career, and she was good at it. She caught 3 instances of misclassified depreciation that saved the combined entity over $800,000 in tax exposure. Her director called her the best forensic eye on the team. She came home from that project with sharper instincts and a particular type of restlessness. In November 2019, she asked Marcus for the login to the new savings account. He told her he'd send it later. Later never came. She asked again in December. He said the bank was doing system maintenance. In January 2020, she told him she needed to review their full financial picture for tax season, a reasonable professional request from a CPA to her husband. Marcus told her she was being paranoid and controlling, and that he didn't appreciate being treated like a suspect in his own home. Renata sat with that response for 3 days. Then she pulled her personal credit report. Her credit score had dropped 47 points. There was an inquiry she didn't recognize from a lender in Savannah she had never done business with. There were 2 credit card accounts she had not opened. She went to the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, and very carefully controlled her breathing. She was not paranoid. She was not controlling. She was an accountant who had just recognized a pattern. What Marcus had done over the 4 years between 2016 and 2020 was this. He had systematically siphoned money from their joint accounts into 3 LLCs he had formed in Georgia, one in his mother's name, one in the name of a college friend who owed him a favor, one simply registered to an address in Savannah that turned out to be a UPS store mailbox. The transfers were modest individually. One $200 here, $3 to $400 there, occasionally a larger move of $11,000 for $18. Zoo-zoned disguised as consulting fees or property maintenance costs. But over 4 years, layered and stacked and moved between accounts in a pattern she recognized from her merger audit work. The pattern of someone who knew just enough about financial forensics to think they were being clever. The total came to $214,000. He had also opened 2 credit cards in her name without her knowledge, run up balances totaling $31,000, and made minimum payments from the joint checking account, payments she hadn't noticed because she hadn't had access to monitor them. Total damages: $245,000. And here is the specific cruelty of it. He had done all of this while telling her, consistently, repeatedly, and in front of witnesses, that she was too stupid to understand money. After what Marcus just did to Renata, on a scale of 1 to 10, how angry are you right now? Drop your number in the comments, because I promise you, it is about to get a whole lot more satisfying. She filed for divorce in February 2020. She retained a family law attorney named Deb Okonkwo, who was sharp and direct, and whose first words after reviewing the financial summary Renata had compiled were, "This is very well documented." Renata had spent 3 weeks building the file before she filed. She had obtained their full banking history through legitimate disclosure requests, pulled the LLC registrations from the Georgia Secretary of State's public database, traced the transfer chains, and produced a 47-page financial forensic summary with exhibit tabs. She had cross-referenced the credit card statements against Marcus's travel records. She had found the UPS store address in Savannah and confirmed it via public satellite imagery. She had done, in 3 weeks and on nights after the children were in bed, what her merger audit team had taken 6 months to do for 2 corporations. But the divorce proceedings were brutal in a way she hadn't fully anticipated. Marcus had his own attorney, a man named Gary Price, who had been doing Georgia family law for 30 years and who had a particular talent for delay, continuances, discovery disputes, motions to exclude, challenges to the valuation methodology of Renata's financial analysis. Every time she felt they were close to resolution, Price found another procedural wrinkle. The case stretched from February 2020 to November 2021. And throughout those 21 months, Marcus did not stop. He contested every asset. He disputed the LLCs, claiming they were legitimate business entities with documented operational expenses. Expenses that, Renata noticed, had been retroactively manufactured in the form of invoices created in the 2 months after she filed. He disputed the credit cards, claiming she had authorized them verbally. He submitted a declaration from his college friend, the one whose name was on one of the LLCs, stating that the entity was a legitimate real estate scouting operation, in which Renata had been a passive investor. The judge, a man 3 years from retirement who seemed mildly bored by all family law proceedings, split the difference in the way judges sometimes do when they're tired. He found that the LLCs constituted marital waste, but accepted Marcus's contested valuation, which conveniently reduced the provable amount to $89,000. He awarded Renata a settlement of $44,500, roughly 20 cents on the dollar, and primary custody of the children, with Marcus retaining every other weekend visitation. He declined to refer the credit card matter to criminal proceedings because, he said, the evidence of authorization was sufficiently ambiguous. He did not call it fraud. He levied a $6,000 fine. He gave Marcus Holloway a verbal warning, and Marcus winked at her in the parking lot. Renata drove home. She sat with Imani and Tobias through dinner, helped them with homework, read to Tobias until he fell asleep, and then went to the kitchen and stood at the counter and looked at the settlement check for $44,500 that she had been handed at the courthouse. She thought about her father's patience and her mother's precision. She thought about the 4 years of transfers. She thought about the dinner party and the 6 people who had laughed. She thought about the word paranoid, said with that specific inflection. In her own kitchen, she put the check in a drawer. She opened her laptop and began a new spreadsheet. Not a revenge spreadsheet, not yet. She opened it to think, the way some people pace or talk to a friend. Renata Holloway thought on spreadsheets. She typed dates. She typed amounts. She typed names and entity names and inquiry dates and address records and a UPS store in Savannah. She built the picture again from scratch. Not because she didn't have it memorized, but because looking at it from the beginning sometimes showed you things you'd missed. 2 hours later, she found the thing she'd missed. There was a 4th LLC. She had found 3 during the divorce proceedings. But in cross-referencing the Secretary of State's database with a broader search parameter, she had been looking for Marcus's name and his mother's name and his college friend's name, but she hadn't been looking for the name of Marcus's sister, Carolyn, with whom Renata had always had a politely cool relationship. She found a 4th entity, registered in 2018. Carolyn Holloway listed as registered agent. Business address, an office suite in Dunwoody, Georgia. Renata pulled the registered address on the Dunwoody suite. It was a legitimate shared office building, not a mailbox. She ran a property record search on the suite number. The leaseholder was a company called Meridian Horizon Properties LLC, which was not the LLC she had found in the SOS database. She searched Meridian Horizon Properties LLC. Marcus Holloway was listed as managing member. The registration date was January 2022, 2 months after the divorce was finalized. She sat back in her chair. He hadn't stopped. He had just restructured. Renata closed the spreadsheet, closed the laptop, and went to bed. She lay in the dark for a long time, thinking about the wink. Then she thought about something else. Over the course of their 21 months of divorce proceedings, there had been one person in Marcus's life who had been consistently, quietly kind to Renata. Not dramatically, no grand gestures. No whispered warnings. Just a warmth that persisted even when it would have been easier to take sides. That person was Imani, their daughter, who was now 9 years old and who had her counting and Hannah's grandfriend quiet patience. Renata thought about Imani, and she realized the plan was not going to take weeks. It was going to take years, and that was fine. Renata just crossed a line in her own mind. No going back. Have you ever had that moment where you stopped being the bigger person and started planning? Tell me about it in the comments. The plan had 3 pillars, and it took Renata 18 months to build them. The first pillar was documentation. Renata had kept everything from the divorce proceedings, every exhibit, every bank statement, every LLC registration, every one of Gary Price's procedural filings. She now began building a supplementary file on Marcus's post-divorce activities, with particular focus on Meridian Horizon Properties LLC, which had been incorporated 2 months after the divorce finalized, and which, she believed, had been funded, at least in part, by money that was still marital in origin, since some of the transfers she had identified in the divorce had occurred in the 6 months prior to her filing and had not been properly recovered in the settlement. She was not a lawyer, but she had spent 21 months watching Gary Price maneuver through the Georgia legal system, and she had learned a great deal about how civil financial fraud cases were structured. She knew that a single well-documented complaint to the Georgia Secretary of State's office, the Georgia Department of Revenue, and, most critically, the IRS could trigger audits that operated entirely outside the civil court system. She knew that audits were not subject to Gary Price's continuances. She knew that the IRS, in particular, had its own timeline, its own forensic resources, and a particular institutional irritation with shell company arrangements that weren't properly reporting income. The second pillar was positioning. Meridian Horizon Properties LLC, as she discovered over the next 8 months through diligent and entirely legal research, was not just a vehicle for hiding money, it was actively transacting. Marcus was using it to broker commercial real estate deals, which was, technically, what he did professionally. But the entity was operating without a proper Georgia real estate broker's license. His individual license was held under his own name through his employer, a commercial brokerage called Hartwell and Cross Realty in Buckhead. Meridian Horizon was conducting transactions independently in its own name without a licensed broker of record. That was not a technicality. That was a violation of Georgia's real estate licensing laws, administered by the Georgia Real Estate Commission. It was the kind of violation that resulted in fines, license suspension, and in aggravated cases, revocation. Renata documented 16 separate transactions conducted by Meridian Horizon between January 2022 and August 2023. She used publicly available property records, deed transfers, and commercial real estate listing databases. She did not hack anything. She did not surveil anyone. She sat at her kitchen table after the children were in bed, and she searched public records with the patience of someone who had been an auditor for 14 years. The third pillar was the most delicate, and it required her to be very careful. Marcus's employer, Hartwell and Cross Realty, did not know about Meridian Horizon. Renata was certain of this because the entity had been structured specifically to avoid association with him. Carolyn was the registered agent, not Marcus, and the managing member designation was buried in a secondary filing that required a specific document request to surface. His employer did not know that one of their licensed brokers was running independent transactions through an unlicensed shell company, which meant that Hartwell and Cross were potentially liable for those transactions if a commission dispute or a client complaint ever arose. Renata did not contact Hartwell and Cross directly. That would have been premature, and it would have tipped Marcus. Instead, she drafted a detailed memo, the kind of memo she would have written for her director during the merger audit, summarizing Meridian Horizon's activities, the licensing violation, and the financial trail connecting it to the undisclosed assets from the 2021 divorce proceeding. She had it reviewed by a Georgia licensed attorney who specialized in financial fraud, not Deb Okonkwo this time, a new attorney. A man named Bartholomew Reese out of a midtown Atlanta firm who had spent 8 years as a financial crimes prosecutor before entering private practice. She had found him through a referral from a colleague at work. She had told him on their first call exactly what she had and what she wanted. He had asked her to send the memo. He called her back the next day. "Where did you work before this?" He asked. "Financial analysis," she said. "Logistics firm, 14 years." "This memo is the most organized thing I've seen outside of federal filing," he said. "Do you want to file a civil fraud action? A regulatory complaint or both?" "Both," said Renata, "and the IRS referral." "That's 3 separate actions," Reese said. "I'm aware," said Renata. There was a pause on the line. "Okay," he said. "Let's build this. Renata is building something here. Do you see where this is going?" Drop your prediction in the comments before the plan unfolds. The regulatory complaint to the Georgia Real Estate Commission was filed in September 2023. Reese handled the filing. Renata's documentation, the 16 transactions, the licensing records, the managing member filings, was attached as a 94-page exhibit package. The complaint named Meridian Horizon Properties LLC and identified Marcus Holloway as the de facto operating broker, with full citation to the statutory licensing requirements and a violation by violation accounting of each transaction. The GREC, which received complaints regularly but rarely with this level of documentation, opened an investigation within 11 days. The IRS referral was filed in October 2023. It covered 2 separate issues: the shell company income from the original 3 LLCs that had never been reported on Marcus's personal returns. Reese had a contact at a forensic accounting firm who confirmed the unreported income totaled approximately $67,000 over the 4-year period, and the Meridian Horizon transactions, which appeared to involve commission income that was not being routed through the official brokerage and therefore was not being reported to Hartwell. And cross, meaning it was almost certainly not appearing on Marcus's W-2 or Schedule C with any accuracy. The IRS does not move quickly, but it moves. The civil fraud action was filed in Fulton County Superior Court in November 2023. It named Marcus Holloway personally, Carolyn Holloway as registered agent of Meridian Horizon, and Meridian Horizon Properties LLC as an entity. The action alleged fraudulent transfer of marital assets, post-divorce concealment, and unjust enrichment, and sought damages of $214,000, the original full amount, not the reduced amount the divorce court had accepted, plus attorney's fees and punitive damages under Georgia's civil fraud statutes. Reese attached as Exhibit A the original 47-page financial forensic summary Renata had prepared for the divorce. Attached as Exhibit B through Exhibit F were the post-divorce documentation packages. Gary Price filed a motion to dismiss within 3 weeks. Reese had anticipated every argument in the motion. He had been a financial crimes prosecutor for 8 years. He had written the brief in advance, updated it when the motion arrived, and filed the response within 10 days. The motion to dismiss was denied in February 2024. Marcus hired a second attorney, a woman from a larger firm. She filed a motion for summary judgment. Reese responded. It was denied. 3 things then happened in rapid, terrible succession for Marcus Holloway. In March 2024, the Georgia Real Estate Commission issued its findings on the licensing complaint. Meridian Horizon Properties LLC had conducted brokered real estate transactions without a licensed broker of record, in violation of ACA 4341 SU. Marcus Holloway was identified as the unlicensed operating broker. The commission issued a formal reprimand and referred the matter to the Hartwell and Cross Compliance Department, as the violations had potentially implicated their licensed entity. Hartwell and Cross's Compliance Department opened an internal review the same week. Reese had informed them, through a formal legal notice, that their licensed broker had been conducting independent transactions through an unlicensed shell company, and that they might face exposure from those transactions. Hartwell and Cross's general counsel determined that this constituted a material violation of Marcus's employment agreement, specifically the exclusivity clause in Section 7 and the disclosure requirements in Section 12A. Marcus was placed on administrative leave on March 19, 2024. On April 3, 2024, Marcus Holloway was terminated from Hartwell and Cross Realty. The termination letter cited 7C and Section 12A of his employment agreement. He received no severance. On April 17, 2024, his Georgia real estate license was suspended pending a formal disciplinary hearing. Without an active license, he could not work as a commercial real estate broker in the state of Georgia. Gary Price called Reese on April 22nd. He indicated his client was prepared to discuss settlement. There is a particular kind of silence that exists in a conference room when one side of a negotiation has nothing left to trade with, and they know it, and the other side knows it, and the only thing left is for the number to be named. Reese named the number on May 8, 2024, in a conference room on the 14th floor of a Midtown Atlanta office building. Marcus sat across the table in a suit that was slightly too formal for the occasion, the way a man dresses when he's trying to look like he still has leverage he no longer has. Carolyn sat beside him, reduced from registered agent to spectator. Gary Price sat at the end of the table, a man who had spent 30 years on procedure and was now in a room where procedure had run out. The number was $198. Ozu, reduced from the $214,000 demand to account for the $44,500 already received in the divorce settlement, and reduced further by a mutual agreement to release Carolyn from the action, plus attorney's fees, plus a confidential rider that required Marcus to cooperate with any subsequent IRS inquiry by producing complete financial records on request. Marcus signed the settlement agreement on May 8, 2024. He had no choice. His license was suspended, his employer had terminated him, and the IRS inquiry, which had quietly notified him of an audit in January, was ongoing and had already sent document requests he had been legally obligated to fulfill. He signed everything. He did not look at Renata. Renata looked at him. She did not smile. She did not wink. She simply watched him sign his name and thought about the dinner party in 2018 and the 6 people who had laughed and the bathroom sink she had gripped until her knuckles ached. She thought, this is what patience looks like from the outside. Reese walked her to the elevator afterward. He was a careful, measured man who didn't emote professionally, but he said, in the lobby, for whatever it's worth, in 8 years of prosecution and 6 years of civil practice, that documentation package is the best I've ever worked with. My mother was an English teacher, Renata said. She told me that if you can't explain something clearly, you don't understand it yet. He nodded. She thanked him. She walked to her car. She did not cry this time. There is a detail that belongs here, because it is the detail that holds the whole story together, and it would be wrong to leave it out. In the spring of 2023, 6 months before the first regulatory complaint was filed, Renata's daughter Imani, who was by then 11 years old and who had her mother's accounting mind and her grandfather's quiet patience, came home from a weekend at Marcus's apartment with a look on her face that Renata recognized immediately. Not fear, not distress. The specific, concentrated alertness of a child who has noticed something and is deciding whether to name it. Renata did not ask. She had learned, in 14 years of marriage to a man who reframed every question as an accusation, not to ask directly. She made dinner. She sat at the table. She let the silence be comfortable. Imani said after a long while, Dad has a lot of boxes at his apartment. What kind of boxes? Renata said, neutrally, as if this were ordinary conversation. Like file boxes, with labels. He got mad when I went near them. Imani looked at her plate. He said they were business stuff, but the labels had dates on them, old dates. She paused, like 2017 and 2018. Renata felt something sharpen in her chest. She kept her voice steady. Okay, she said. Did he say anything else? He was on the phone a lot. Amani said. With someone named Gary. He kept saying something about exhibits. Renata nodded. Mom, Amani said, is Dad in trouble? Renata looked at her daughter, 11 years old, precise and quiet, and watching her mother with those careful eyes, and said, Not yet. But I'm working on it. Imani nodded once, with a gravity that did not belong to 11, but that Renata recognized completely. Okay, Imani said, and went back to her dinner. She had not, technically, told her mother anything she hadn't already known. But she had confirmed something that mattered. Marcus was not as careful as he thought he was. He had documents. He had old documents with old dates. And he was still talking to Gary Price, which meant he knew there was a problem he was trying to manage. Renata had called Bartholomew Reese the following morning. Now that you've seen how it played out, was Renata justified? Did she go too far? Or not far enough? Give me your verdict in the comments. The IRS audit concluded in August 2024. The findings were not shared with Renata. Tax matters are confidential, but Reese had a former colleague who worked adjacent to the process and who confirmed, in the careful language of someone being professionally circumspect, that the inquiry had resulted in a significant assessment. Marcus had retained a tax attorney in addition to Gary Price's and the Fulton County litigation attorney. The three attorneys, Renata estimated, had cost him somewhere between $80,000 and $120,000 in legal fees alone, on top of the $198,000 settlement. His Georgia real estate license remained suspended through the end of 2024. He had filed for reinstatement, but the disciplinary hearing had not yet been scheduled as of the last public record Renata checked. Carolyn Holloway had dissolved Meridian Horizon Properties LLC in June 2024, 3 weeks after the settlement. Gary Price had not returned Renata's attorney's calls during the litigation as promptly as Reese, because Gary Price had been accustomed to being the one who set the pace. Renata Holloway, née Okafor, which is the name on her new business cards, is 44 years old now. She is the Director of Financial Risks and Compliance at a logistics firm in Alpharetta, a promotion she received in January 2024. Before the settlement, when her director told her that the forensic work she had done on a client contract dispute had saved the company $1. $2 million in potential exposure. She bought a house in 2023, her name only on the deed, her name only on the mortgage, her name only on everything. It has a yard. There is a dogwood tree. Imani is 12 now and has begun showing an interest in data analysis that Renata finds quietly thrilling. Tobias is 10 and still brings her dandelions from the yard when he finds them, which she accepts every time with exactly the gravity they deserve. She has not spoken to Marcus since the conference room on the 14th floor. She does not need to. The children are handled through a parenting coordinator, which was written into the updated custody order. Marcus sees them every other weekend when he's in the state, which is increasingly irregular given his current professional circumstances. She does not hate him. She will tell you this clearly if you ask, and she is not being falsely magnanimous. She has simply found that hatred is expensive, and she has always been careful with her resources. What she feels about Marcus Holloway is something cooler and more durable. She understands him completely, and understanding is not the same as forgiveness and not the same as hatred, and it leaves no room for him to surprise her. She kept the spreadsheet, the original one from the night after the courthouse parking lot. She keeps it in a folder on her laptop alongside her other financial documents, filed alphabetically under H for Holloway, subfoldered under the year 2020. She has not opened it since May 8, 2024. She doesn't need to. She knows what it says. The $44.500 check from the original settlement, the one she put in the drawer the night she found the fourth LLC, was deposited into Imani's college fund. In September 2024, it was earning interest by the time the leaves changed. There is a thing that Renata's father used to say, derived from some combination of scripture, and 30 years of watching his congregation work through their difficulties. that the opposite of patience is not urgency, the opposite of patience is waste, and that a person who spends themselves in reaction is a person to given someone else their time. Renata had given Marcus Holloway 11 years. She had decided, in a parking lot in Marietta on a Tuesday morning in March, that 11 years was the last thing he would ever take from her. Everything after that was hers. Every hour, every spreadsheet, every public record search, every phone call with Bartholomew Reese, every line in every exhibit package, hers. And in the end, the math was simple. She had gotten back $198,000, her professional trajectory, her name, her house, her children's financial security, and the specific quiet satisfaction of having outworked, outdocumented, and outthought a man who had bet, for years, on her being too stupid to read a bank statement. She had not been angry in the conference room. She had not needed to be. The spreadsheet had been angry for her. If you've ever gotten even or ever wished you had, tell me about it in the comments, because this vault has room for every story, and I'm listening.